Thank you for joining us for another in our series Under the Redwoods. I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director of Sempervirens Fund. And in this webinar series, we explore all things Redwood, science, history, politics, benefits of Redwoods, etc. History, maybe I said that already, all things Redwoods. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank Scharf Investments, who has been the sponsor of this webinar series throughout the year. We greatly appreciate their support. Sempervirens is very curious about redwoods. That's the whole point of this webinar series. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of different ways to think about redwoods and different perspectives to take on them. And we find that artists of many different kinds, and Sempervirens has worked with composers and fine artists and photographers and a number of different folks who work in different media, helps us see these forests and understand them and our relationship to them in a different way. And today's speaker, I think, will do just that. We are proud to invite her to join us on today's webinar, but even more proud that Jane Kim is our first Forest Fellow. And she's going to talk a bit about that fellowship and what it means, what the relationship with Sempervirens means. Jane is a visual fine artist, a science illustrator, and if you've been following Sempervirens for a while, you are sure to have seen a number of her projects, because we've worked with her a number of times over the years. She is the founder of InkDwell Studio, and in addition to doing projects with us, she's done large-scale public art across the country, focused on natural themes, usually species-oriented, but not always, including the Wall of Birds at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and produced works for the National Aquarium, the De Young Museum, and more. So she is a serious artist, in addition to being a fantastic partner to us, and we've been really proud to collaborate with her. She is in the process now of creating a collection of new artworks as part of this Forest Fellowship effort. And that art is centered on redwoods, and I'm sure she's going to talk to you a bit about that today, featuring their inner rings and exploring the interactions of redwoods with fire, water, earth, air, plants, animals, and people. So we are very excited to hear from her and talk to her today. So with that, I'd like to welcome to our webinar, Jane Kim. Thanks, Jane. And
Hi,
look
everybody.
at that beautiful artwork in the background.
I'm sorry, I guess it looks a little washed out. The light changed, as it does. But thank you so much, Sarah, for welcoming me here today. And it's really exciting to be here with you. Thank you so much, everybody, for giving me an hour of your time. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak about some subjects I actually haven't had an opportunity to touch on in this way. So this is quite a special presentation for me as well. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, here I am. So InkDwell is the name of my studio. And of course, we explore the wonders of the natural world. And we do that in a number of ways. Sarah touched on just a number of those projects. I think that our studio is best known for. So I just wanted to reintroduce myself to those of you who are joining us today that don't know me or InkDwell's work. So one of the, there we go, projects that was called out was the Wall of Birds. And this is at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I created this in 2015. And it showcases at the time the 243 families of birds that were described, as well as a parade of ancestors on the stairwell that dates back 375 million years. All the species were painted to scale. So that's an 8-foot ostrich I'm standing next to. And it was just an amazing work of art that I think really set the tone for InkDwell and what we stand for. And then you may also be familiar, if you do know InkDwell, the Migrating Mural series, which is a series of mural installations that are painted along migration corridors that they share with people. So our very first series focused on the Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep here in California along Highway 395. And there are 6 unique installations along that highway. And we partnered with the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Sierra Bighorn Recovery Program, as well as the Sierra Nevada Bighorn Sheep. Oh my gosh. They're the organization for Sierra Nevada Bighorn Sheep, which is, I apologize, is escaping my name right now. It's a very simple name, and I'm having a brain moment. But I'm going to just flash through these projects quickly, just so that you can see them. So this is in Mount Williamson, or in Independence, California, at the Mount Williamson Hotel. And each one of these murals tells a unique story about the sheep, its actual geographic location, which is a little bit different depending on where you are in the Eastern Sierra Range. Here, this is in Lone Pine. And then we've now moved on to the migrating mural that represents monarch butterflies. So when we first came up with this project, we had envisioned land, sky, and sea for sure to start with. And so our sky animal, we had a number of different species that we could select, but we ultimately landed on the monarch butterfly. As you can see, its geographic range is immense, from Canada to Mexico and hitting almost all of the lower 48. And so we have now 10 unique installations across the United States. Here's in Arkansas at Springdale Airport. We have 2 in Florida. This is at Full Sail University in Winter Park. This one was in downtown Orlando, Florida. Unfortunately, this building has actually since been taken down, but we still have these wonderful photographs. And here I am for scale. We worked with SF Day School, and we created a monarch migrating mural with the kids on their rooftop. And we taught them how to transfer and paint their own mural. These are banners that hang on the outside entrance of the Ogden Nature Center and shows the life cycle of a monarch butterfly. And also in Ogden, we have 2 other installations. This one is called Monarch in Moda at the Monarch, which is an art makerspace in downtown. And this is me for scale again. And this is at Weber State University in the art department, as this was also part of an artist in residence program that we collaborated with Weber State. Okay, and here in San Francisco, we actually have 2 monarch migrating murals, one at 943 Howard Street between 5th and 6th, and the other in the Tenderloin. This one is called a Papillon, and this is actually a 3-sided installation. So here's one side. This side's called One Monarch, which wraps to the front, and then Butterflies and Poppies, which was inspired by the title of a Van Gogh painting of the same name. And then on the interior, there is a hand-painted wall covering on California poppies and shows 34 different species of butterflies that have been observed in San Francisco, according to iNaturalist. Here's a few close-ups there. And then our latest monarch migrating mural actually took place this past summer at a location in Springfield, Illinois on historic Route 66, and it's at a place called Kidseum of Health and Science. So it's a kids museum dedicated totally to topics of health and science. And they have a pollinator exhibit that these 2 murals are supporting. Here's one side, and here's the other. So I can obviously go into great detail about all of these projects, but you can learn a little bit more about the monarch migrating mural by Googling story map monarch migrating mural. And this takes you through the 9 previous installations. Springfield has not yet been added to this story map, but it really talks about ways that you can be involved as a citizen science or just as a citizen, and how you can support pollinator habitat and be a part of the conservation story. So now our next hope, as I said, land, sky, and sea, we're shooting to do a salmon migrating mural, and we're hoping to paint our very first one here in Harbor Village, or Pillar Point in the Harbor Village here in Half Moon Bay, which is where our studio is actually located. So stay tuned for that. I'm really putting out good energy for this to take shape. Another project that you might be familiar with is our series called City and Nature. This is at the Orinda Public Library. And this is a turn of phrase. You know, I'm saying we are a city that we've put ourselves in nature instead of celebrating nature being in cities. I think it really is the other way around. And so this is all hoping to change the perspective of how we look at ourselves and our place within the ecosystem and the environment. And here's a couple of different close-ups of this particular project. And of course, this is right here in Half Moon Bay, and this is our second City in Nature at the MacDutrip Park in downtown on Main Street. And then another project that you may be familiar with is the Bay Nature Magazine Seasonal Almanac, which I've had the privilege of illustrating since 2018. So every issue represents a new season, and in each one of these spreads, we select 6 different species tied to that particular season of the Bay Area. And that is, in fact, how I believe Sempervirens and I connected in the first place, because our first project together was to illustrate a series called Redwoods and Climate. And this particular series, and if you haven't had an opportunity to read through this, please do, because this maybe had opened up some information and understanding about redwoods and the immense task at hand to think about how to be better stewards of redwoods, because when we think about conservation, all of a sudden we realize that as humans we have a very limited sort of linear relationship with time and the natural world, and nature does not. It is so deeply connected to all things that in order to really understand how to best serve redwood trees, we need to dive so deep into so many different topics and ask so many different questions. And this particular series really helped me understand how important asking those questions and looking at all of the different angles is. And so this particular illustration for me still underscores how I am viewing the fellowship and my forest fellowship with Sempervirens today. And so what we have here is a redwood tree inside a glass box. And that for me is the humanness, is sort of this isolation of looking at something and seeing if we can't expand our understanding by looking at all the different factors. So here we have the rain, we have fog, we have the sun, we have soil, we have, you know, soaked roots, we have fire. So we're looking at this tree from all of the different classical elements and its relationship to each so that we can better understand this tree. And some of the my favorite illustrations, which are very much squarely rooted in science illustration. And so my background is not only in fine art, but in scientific illustration. I am proudly an alumni and a graduate of the California State University, Monterey Bay, CSUMB, Science Illustration Program. And it is a year-long extension program where it's all things science illustration. And so I will touch on my what I might say is a little bit of a shift and a departure from pure fine art and how I arrived at that. But I absolutely love, and the studio loves, creating infographics and information-based imagery to help people connect with information more easily. So I loved this historic range and current post range map to, in an instant, really show the amount of real estate that has shrunk that our amazing redwood trees thrive and grow in, against what historically was the range. And so there's a lot of different factors for why this has shrunk down so much, and this paper and this series explores just that. And one of the ways I love this illustration too for the series, and one of the patterns, of course, when we're looking and dating far, far back into thousands and thousands of years ago, we have to rely on carbon dating and paleo efforts. And this is about core samples that were taken along the coastline that shows redwood pollen and other tree pollens in the bed of our oceans. And from there, we can understand the range of our redwood trees and other trees on our coastline, which is amazing. And it also includes an upwelling illustration, which, there are many out there. And so one of my jobs as an artist is to see if I can bring something else that can help with clarity or being able to decipher and understand something more easily and quickly by just a graphic. And so I'm hoping my upwelling illustration has done just that without the wind, the warm water does not get pushed away for this cold water to come up and over and replace that warm water. And in that upwelling is nutrient crazy water, which is what our coastline now and our ecosystems now depend on. And so here's another fun map that shows another way that redwoods need to survive is through their water consumption. And so we find consistent, if we look at the precipitation with morphology of a redwood tree, we can also see the ways that water impacts what the redwood tree looks like. And so when you're up north and you have higher water content, the shape and the silhouette of the tree is going to be different than places with drier areas. And this is the way that the redwood tree adapts to its environment. And so here's another illustration that, again, for me, just there were so many moments in illustrating for this particular series that absolutely blew my mind. And this is the pixel problem. And this was sort of a massive there's so much in this, and how do we distill the pixel problem in a simple graphic? And so I'm just going to kind of outline this graphic for you all quickly here. And we have a grid, and okay, backing up a little bit more. So how one even measures climate and what needs to happen in order to make decisions to steward and protect ecosystems, there's been a model that scientists can all use to understand what these conditions are. And it's broken down into sort of what you might think of as a plot of land, right? And so each one of these squares represents 50 kilometers. But as we started to dive in deeper, what scientists began to quickly understand was that the conditions that redwoods grow in from the north to the southern end, the Santa Cruz mountain range, there's so many different parameters that we can't actually apply the same conservation tools for the trees up north as we do for the trees south. And so we started to shrink what those parameters were, and in a sense shrank sort of the pixel size of circumstances that are necessary to think about for how we best serve these trees, right? And so this pixel shrank down, and you can see this little dot here, down to 800 meters, right? Versus the 50 kilometers range. And that's a much tinier pixel. And within that geographic range, what are the set of circumstances that these particular trees are adapting to, right? And so these are just some of the ways that, again, I think I was being challenged by my own limited understanding and realizing that I am still evolving and kind of growing out of the conditioned state of humans, which are very monoculture and linear, right? And I was like, wow, I really need to open my own mind. And so this was a time scale, right? That's another massive topic for redwoods that is so hard for humans to wrap their heads around, because our lives are so much shorter than a redwood tree. And its existence on this planet is so much shorter than a redwood tree. And so this particular map was so exciting to see all the different species that have gone extinct and where they were on today's map. And of course, even our continent has undergone multiple shapes and forms. But if we were to place the particular records on what we know today as the Earth, this is where you would find that range of trees. And you can see that in the present day, there is that third redwood that is not the giant sequoia or the coast redwood. It's actually a dawn redwood. And so please allow me to take you on a completely different tangent that actually will reconnect my practice as an artist and this Forbes Fellowship specifically. So last year, June of 2023, I was so lucky to revisit South Korea, which is, of course, where my parents are from. And we visited a place called Gyeongju, which is south of in the southern end of Korea. And this actually sits squarely in the Silla Kingdom, which I'm just about to touch on here too. But when we parked the car, we parked next to what is a fairy ring of dawn redwoods. And I almost started crying. I ran out of the car, ran to this tree, and I was like, oh my God, it's the dawn redwood. And, you know, I was like, what is it doing here in Korea when it's, you know, its original range is China? And I didn't even realize that it is now a really popular ornamental street tree in South Korea. And funny enough, they're now finding that maybe that actually wasn't such a great idea. They're just like our redwoods here, the roots of these redwoods are pretty shallow, and they have been causing a lot of pavement distress and pipes, and it's just not a convenient tree for urban landscapes. And so there are actually now cities and planting dawn redwoods, and for good reason. But you know, for me, what that shows more is our disconnection once again, and thinking about the tree for one purpose, and thinking about life through one lens, which is how does it serve us? And so this really already was in my mind when I saw this. And the second thing that we did after seeing this set of this beautiful fairy ring of dawn redwoods was go to the Cultural History Museum. And Gyeongju is known as like a living a living history museum, because when you are there, everything is preserved, and they've done a really they have made a concerted effort to try to preserve and keep the history and the original architecture of the place as intact as possible. But the Silla Kingdom right here sits squarely within that Silk Route. And when I was at this museum, something really interesting started to formulate in my mind. So I'm going to take what I'll come back to this, but what this picture is the inside of one of the tombs of the Silla Kingdom. And this is when in Korea, burial grounds started to take more importance, and being buried with your things, especially the royalty, the emperors, being buried with things became a popular practice. And so this got me thinking, let's trace back, because you know, one of the questions that I'm often asked in particular to conservation is, how would art help, or why art, and why even make art in general? And for people who don't like art, or don't have an appreciation for it, it's like, what's the point? And I think that those are all fair questions, but these are ones that I really try to answer for myself as I move through my own practice and understand why I even do what I even do. So this is the header for a piece on history.com. So this is the title of the piece. What prehistoric cave paintings reveal about early human life? Some of the oldest known art may hint at the beginning of language development, while later examples portray narratives with human and animal figures. So for me, art and humanity are inseparable. And art was an early form of communication that predates language. And then it later became a way for us to tell stories. And so this aspect of why humans even do what we do as it comes to art is something that I keep in my practice and try to think about all the time whenever I am making a new piece. And that's even true for the migrating mural. And we can tie that back to that too after I've run through some of these examples. And so the museum was really about the transition of the Neolithic era into modern day humans, where we became agricultural and farmed and sedentary, and we created homes, permanent homes. But what I also saw was a correlation of manipulation of our natural environment through the use of our hands and making and crafts and objects. And the more manipulative that process became, the more importance and value we placed on man-made objects and art. And so here from left to right, we start with stone, right? Carving stone. That was a pretty basic form of manipulation of a natural material. And then we move into pottery. Now that takes even more sort of doing and thinking outside of the box and ingredient making and manipulation. There's now fire potentially involved. And we see that we have control over our natural world, and we can make things that don't exist, and we don't have to play by the rules of nature, so to speak. And another thing that came out of that is the farming and the cooking. And so I love this picture too of this is the stone, we have wood, we have clay, and we have food. And our ability to make food, which is, in my opinion, another art form all in and of its own, is extraordinary. And I think that for me, that I have a really weird relationship with art, because on some level, I do think it's one of the things that actually pulled us away from our understanding and our real integration in nature, because we're able to make things and invent things. And here we are then moving into the Bronze era, the Bronze Age. And that's really where the Silk Route exploded, right? We have glass and blown glass coming into play. We have jewelry. We have the ability to make weapons and swords and put metals together. And it's like we're magicians, right? And so we have this like amazing ability to craft things. And no wonder why we had such high value on these objects, these man-made objects. But in some way, it sort of took us away from the rules and playing with understanding what our impact is in that natural world, because we just got a little bit crazy with our own ability, right? And so here we are, fast forward into logging, and when we saw these giants in the West Coast, and there was nothing else like this in the United States, of course we went crazy for the lumber. And that makes a lot of sense. And so fast forward this relationship with object making and the power of the maker. I just want to take a moment to call out some more contemporary artworks that, for me, as someone who is so dedicated to wanting to reconnect with nature, I find some of these works and sort of the way that the art world has also evolved, one that I had a hard time resolving. And so when I speak of these works as examples, I just want to put the caveat out there that I'm only talking about my own reactions to these works. And it by no means is it to shape or place judgment on these works of art themselves. However, this is my own sentiment. This is a piece called by Walter de Maria. It's called New York Earth Room. It was made in, created in 1977. And it's basically a room that's just completely filled with dirt. And to make it art, what we did is we removed it from context, because that's often what contemporary art likes to do. It removes from context and then gives it a new meaning so that we may better see something or shape a perspective or jolt us out of our norms. So I understand the real necessity for that. But in removing this soil, I almost feel like we've taken the dignity away from the soil, from everything that was alive in that soil, and we've sterilized it. And in fact, when I read something about the upkeep of this particular art piece, the staff mentioned that sometimes mushrooms do in fact make their way through and grow, again, speaking to the aliveness of what was actually in that soil. And what they do is they kill it. They take the mushrooms away to keep it art. So this is something that I really struggle with in terms of what it really means to know and understand and be connected to our ecosystem. So here's another work of art, Olafur Eliasson. Again, incredible artist, but this is called Riverbed. 2014 even. This is something that, again, I feel a little disconnected. I don't look at this, or even, I've never had the opportunity to walk through this, but I imagine in walking through this, that I would have so many questions of, what kind of riverbed is this trying to represent? What about all the life that a riverbed is supposed to have with it? These rocks, which are actually formed by the process of water carving them, are simply placed here. So there's a lot of things that, in removing it from its context, what are we trying to say in return? And so these were questions that I struggled with as an artist and as a fine artist learning about art history, learning about my contemporaries, and learning about what it means to contribute as an artist. I started to ask myself some deep questions. So this is what Eliasson says about this work. Riverbed fills the white space of the museum with a gray rocky landscape through which a narrow stream meanders. The landscape, comprising stones of various size and shape and in range of gray tones, slopes up gently from where visitors enter and the stream disappears. Visitors are free to choose their own path as they move up towards the source of the stream, where the water bubbles up mysteriously through the stones. The contrast between these entirely new pathways and the routes suggested by the museum's architecture challenges visitors' expectations and invites them to find innovative ways of navigating this space. So for me, this piece was so much more about the space than it is about the riverbed. And looking at the materials, they're collected from all kinds of different sources. And so this removing and placing out of context, I think, can be squarely attributed to Marcel Duchamp. And this is in 1917. It's called Fountain. And when explaining the purpose of his ready-made sculpture, Duchamp stated, "They are everyday objects raised to the dignity of a work of art by the artist's act of choice." And so now this is quite interesting. Wow, as an artist, I'm feeling like I have a ton of power. And what I choose to make dignified through my artworks has a lot of meaning. And so here, fast forward, here's a work of art that I sort of made as a gesture to challenge this a little bit. Here is, this was when I was an artist in residence at the De Young. And this is called Preservation Conservation. On the backdrop, when I was an artist in residence there for the full month, every day, I matched the color of the sky with the color of paint and painted that in sort of like a clock behind this pedestal that has objects of blown glass with sand that I collected from Ocean Beach, which is what these jars here represent, are different places on Ocean Beach in San Francisco where I collected sand. And I worked with my friend who is an amazing glass artist. Her name is Jess Weiner. And she and I worked together to trap this sand in these glass orbs. So there's no opening. This sand is now completely trapped. And so this was my tag. San Francisco's original habitat was coastal scrub and sand dunes. Today we stand on an artifact of human creation. Ocean Beach represents a tiny glimpse of San Francisco's native habitat. Ocean Beach sand was collected and preserved inside hand-blown glass. The introduction of sand to the molten hot glass spheres creates organic and uncontrollable change to the object's overall form. With the constantly changing color of the sky mapped behind, this piece shares the beauty of time and a moment frozen in time. But in being frozen in time, all life within the sand has been extinguished. What has actually been preserved or conserved? Okay, so now we come back to Sempervirens and Fund and the Forest Fellowship and why it is so thrilling to be able to collaborate with their organization in an art-centered manner. Now, this is another infographic that I created for the Coast and Climate, Redwoods and Climate series. And it was about the science of dendrochronology. And rather than illustrating tree rings, which I thought, well, why would we do that when we can print the rings from these trees and give you actual impressions of these trees? And so we collected already down trees and we cut cookies off of those down trees. And I took those back into my studio, prepped them, and printed them for this particular infographic. Actually, this round 3, it says 380 years old, but through this fellowship, we actually collected bigger rounds from YMCA Jones, the YMCA camp in Jones Gulch. And so we took a nice, beautiful, long hike through their property. And this particular stump really called out to me. And it was right at the entrance, which was going to make it easy to collect. But what intrigued me about this particular stump was this massive fire scar that was at the base of this tree. And so clearly this tree had seen some events, and that's really what I wanted to understand. And so Allison Carroll is a dendrochronologist that was featured in Redwoods and Climate, but we also invited her to the studio to then help me understand this particular individual in Jones Gulch. And so she and I looked at the various rings on this particular tree. I had to sand it down to 600 grit sandpaper so it was nice and smooth. And she used a microscope to count sort of a decade marking increments in the tree rings, and then run it through her already existing data of tree rings that she has already sampled in the area. So that's what this particular graph here shows. And the blue is the data that she has from existing samples. And this black is the one that is recorded from this particular individual tree. So you can see how it matches up with growth patterns of other trees that have been sampled, which allows her to then give pretty accurate dates on certain rings on this particular tree. So with that, we were able to map out the various fire events that this tree actually survived, which was more than we had expected. So if you can see here, there's an inner fire scar, and there is the outer fire scar. Now, this outer one was the one that attracted me to this trunk. But the inner scar is quite interesting because here, working with Allison was absolutely amazing. And I felt like because of her, I was able to become a little bit more tree ring literate. And I wouldn't have known this until this exploration, which I'm, again, just so utterly grateful for this opportunity to work with sempervirens in this way. But what we discovered is that this tree at 1592 had fully sealed itself over from this first fire, which maybe took place at around 1570. And so this shape that you see when you see these two sort of like furling tree rings coming around, and then eventually it sort of evens out and becomes regular rings again, that is indicative of the tree having gone through some event or something that stressed it out and it had to repair itself. And so that outer one, we can see here that, there were maybe two different fire events, 1850 and maybe another in 1863. But that particular scar never did heal itself, because you can see it started to try, and you can see this outer fire scar curling its way around to try to repair, and you can see that it is curling its way around to try to repair itself. And then we did discover there was another itty bitty little mini event here at about 1616. So it was all quite fascinating. All of this to say that, what I'm hoping to, in this fellowship, to really take the philosophies that I just shared with you about the relationship that human beings have art as one of communication and storytelling, and the problems that I see with modern art, which really places the art squarely at center. I would like to try to remove myself from center and merely be a conduit to this individual tree. And so I feel like I am asking sempervirens scientists to help me speak tree and understand this individual tree as it lived in Jones Gulch. And so what I hope to create are works of art that are informed entirely by this tree. And I'm not really bringing anything other than my storytelling, aesthetic decision making and graphic decision making to these works of art. And that first tree that I showed you, this one down here, I did want to point out that in the paper, we say maybe it's about 380 years old. So we came to that date by simply counting as best we could the physical rings that were actually printed in this print. But when Allison was in the studio, she actually dated this particular round for me too. And this is the one that's actually sitting behind me, this big one here. And you can see how massive the other trunk is. This round is actually older than this massive one. And that's because it was probably taken from higher up on the tree. So this particular specimen was collected from a really long downed tree. And I don't know when it would have fallen, but she counted over 550 rings. And this particular redwood that we're carrying here is about 550 years old too, if we use 2023 as the last point of growth, which I know you're going to say, wait, but this tree was cut 100 years ago. I'm going to get to that here in a second too. But first I want to actually shout out, I forgot to do this when I showed this picture earlier, this little yellow glove. That's actually Matt Schaefer. It looks like Thayer and I are just very nonchalantly pushing this massive round down the hall of our studio, but that's Matt bearing most of that weight on a dolly there. So thank you, Matt. That was a big day trying to get 3 of these cookies into the studio. Okay, so now here I've done a test print because I just wanted to see what the rings would look like on a giant piece of paper, but it's not a clean print. We've got more experimenting to do. But the story hasn't unveiled itself to me yet, and I'm not entirely sure where the imagery is, what the tree has to say to me and where the imagery is going to go. And so here's just a couple of close-ups. But what I can say is that from the round that we collected at Big Basin, I am currently working on a series that highlights the relationship redwood trees have to our elements, earth, fire, wind, or air, and water, because of mostly inspired by the climate redwoods and climate series, is that they had to look at all of these different aspects of factors that play into redwoods adapt, how redwoods adapt, and the conditions that they need in order to thrive. So this piece is my fire piece, and of course I'll be working on others, but this is still a work in progress. But what I have shown here is a culmination of imagery taken from my field trips and research with scientists that Sempervirens Fund has connected me with. So I won't get too much into the story of this particular piece until it's completely finished. But what I can say is that each one of these pieces, and there'll be each square like this with the redwood in the center. And I like the way that this automatically makes us think of logging simply because of its shape and seeing the redwood rings like this. So our impact is felt instantly. But then what I want to show is how that tree adapts to that said element, and the way that this tree also creates relationships to the rest of its environment within those elements as well. And what I'm hoping is that we can learn something about ourselves through the redwoods and the stories about redwoods. So it's really more about what can we walk away with as lessons to become better species within our own environments. So here's just a couple of close-ups of where I'm at right now on this piece, and ending with, again, this particular illustration, which to me really, again, sets the whole foundation up. So that is so far what I'm up to as a Forest Fellow. I will be hosting a number of different workshops throughout the rest of 2020 into 2025. I've got 2 upcoming workshops, and of course, more curiosity stories, which I have forgotten to mention here, which are just like 6-minute video clips of different moments along the process as a Forest Fellow. And I'm looking forward to, of course, connecting with more scientists and going on way more field trips and becoming wowed and blown away by redwoods over and over and over again.
Jane, thank you. I'm having trouble turning my video on for some reason. Whoops. No, there we go. Thank you so much for that. Your work is amazing. Every time I see it, I'm impressed. And one of the things that I found most amazing as we've worked more closely with you is the amount of effort you put into really studying your subject. And it's not like you just go out and take a picture and make a painting or an illustration. You spend a lot of time and put a lot of energy into really deeply understanding the ecology, as well as other things related to your subjects. So that's just a really interesting aspect of your process and your work that I'm not sure our audience would know, but I will highlight and it will come out. I invite this audience to check out the curiosity stories because I think some of it will come out in those videos. But I'm curious, I've always felt like you are an artist who is on a mission, not just to create beauty, but, and maybe it's in part because you do these amazing public art projects that reach so many people and have a heavy emphasis on educational opportunities. But is that true? Is my analysis true that you really do approach this work with sort of a conservation lens that you're trying to bring to the larger audience? Or
So
do you
much.
see that as more of just an ancillary byproduct?
No, 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 so much so. And I, when you said that, I absolutely lit up with a smile because I felt very seen in that moment. I am absolutely on a mission. I do think that it stems from my own my own pain of not feeling connected enough to my environment. And so, what can I do if others are feeling the same way to be connected? And so, a lot of the work that I do has a high emphasis on being site specific. So, if you're
Mhm.
experiencing that work in that space, it's highlighting something about where you are right in this moment in time. And that's what art for me also is. First and foremost, it's a way for me to connect to the own questions and confusions that I have of being a human being and feeling very estranged from the natural world. And I do see threads, and when I follow history, and which is why I'm so interested in history, I can start to unravel and see where maybe those we diverged, from our real living as a part of nature.
Yeah, and one of the reasons Sempervirens created this fellowship, and you were an obvious first choice, was to help uh, people see these forests and the associated ecology a bit differently, see them through a different literal lens, and help prompt fresh or different thinking about how people's own relationship is with those forests. And so I'm curious, you're only partway into your fellowship, but are there things that you're already seeing in terms of how your perspective has shifted that you think you will bring to the artwork that you're doing as part of this project?
Yes, I think in this exploration as a forest fellow, it was even more, and I was already sort of dabbling with this idea of interconnectedness, but I think that looking at being taught by redwood trees, I realized how much more I have to learn about what it really means to be interconnected. And so some of the work, the research has led me to understanding the mycorrhizal root system underneath, and that redwoods, even in extension, have this further adaptation where in their roots there's something called a rhizonoid, and that holds and stores fungi from thousands of years ago. And so my own understanding of what um, life and death actually means is been crazy ripped apart in a good way. Revisiting Big Basin recently and seeing all this ceanothus, that like huge hedges of ceanothus growing, it's like, wow, this was all under here in the soil. What does it actually mean to be alive and dead? And um, yeah, I feel like there's so much. And so really, I hope even in the series behind me, because when all of the elements are done, when they hang, there are going to be parts of like the duff that's highlighted in the fire that's going to continue into the water story, because water and the what the tree drops into the river sheds for salmon, and importance for salmon, everything is so connected. And so what I'm hoping I can show is that I can't even isolate the tree into fire, wind, earth, water. It's like it's a whole picture. And so with the massive rounds, I think for me, I really want to celebrate the tree as an individual, and the stories behind me is more about the full connection.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry that we're running out of time because we could have a long conversation about this. And I really do want to encourage our audience. We are going to be bringing Jane to you in a lot of different fora to share the work that she's doing over the course of this fellowship. We are so fortunate to have you, Jane. I think you bring not only beautiful, inspiring art, but you just are a provocative thinker and help us think in different ways. So I'm really looking forward to the continuation of this partnership. And for our audience, I really invite you, check out on our website the curiosity story that Jane already did, and there will be more to come, including my understanding is we'll be doing an art exhibit with you, an exhibit of your art at a gallery in the future. So there will be a lot more to come coming out of this partnership. So thank you, Jane. Thank you to our audience. Please join us next month. We will shift gears again. I feel like we veer all over the place with this webinar, but always I'm finding there are interesting new lessons. And next month, we'll be joined by Dr. Erin McGee. Dr. McGee is a herpetologist and a conservation expert from the Los Angeles Zoo. So we're going to learn about snakes and lizards and salamanders and some of the other critters that occupy the Duff and other parts of those redwoods here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So thank you. Join us for our next webinar. And thank you again to Sharf Investments for sponsoring this amazing webinar series. And thank you, Jane. We look forward to continuing collaboration with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.